Hey guys, so today we're discussing all things practical. So I'm honestly very confused why schools are just so theoretical and that we're not implementing things like we should be. So I'm going to give some examples, some ideas of how we can change things up a bit, and then ending with a rant that I wrote up very passionately a while ago. Also, starting from next week, I'm going to do episodes every fortnight, so every 2 weeks, just because right now, if you're not aware, I'm in the middle of my Masters of Teaching, so things are a little bit hectic. But yeah, so now that we've got that out of the way, let's get into it. Hey guys, so if you've been following me, whether it's through this podcast or through my work in general, then I feel like you would realize that I love practical work. It makes sense to me. It like taking theoretical ideas and putting it into a way that we can understand it by doing things. I always think of the fact that we don't learn by thinking about things, we learn by doing and sharing and implementing. And this is why I've ranted about schools so much, is because I think they're too theoretically demanding. Like they focus so much on theory and about studies and about compiling what you learn into an essay that we don't even do the most fundamental things of practicing what we learn. And it's 2 episodes ago, it's called How to Learn Anything. And it talks about how learning is the first part, only the first part of the learning process. There's actually reflection, there's implementation, and there's sharing that we just don't do. And so I like to use the example of musical theory, where musical theory, you learn the theory. That's important. That's foundational knowledge. But how are you going to implement that? So you can ask them to compose something, use that theory, compose something, and then play it, like play an instrument, share it with someone. And that's how you truly learn. We also talk about this idea of practical work in our interview with Morko in episode 6, where we talk about placement, why we're both obsessed with placement and exchange. And also through my ebook as well, I've dedicated segments directly speaking about practical work. And that's also what I want to get into today. I also do want to talk about practical examples of how we can do practical work. I like that. And then also ending this with a rant that I wrote down angrily for when my friend told me a situation she was going through. I wrote it down. Don't worry, it's relevant. Okay, so the first thing is too much theory, not enough practical. This was a segment in my ebook, and I ended up giving suggestions because I'm like, okay, say if we're learning plant biology, how I learned it in uni was to sit in a lecture hall with, I don't know how many other students, I think 500 or something absolutely ridiculous. And I was so bored. My friend was so bored that she was playing like solitaire on a laptop. I got distracted, by the way. But that is how we learned, in a lecture hall. And I want to switch that up. Imagine if you had the option of growing your own plant. Like, instead of consuming lecture slides and trying to compile information into your head, why don't you learn through growing a plant yourself and changing, what did I say? I said changing the watering frequencies, changing soil density, seeing how the plant absorbs that nutrient and how it affects its anatomy if you were to change something very small. So essentially this idea is getting students to do their own studies, maybe get them to write their own hypothesis, their own aim, their own, write a research paper about this plant. This is going to teach you so much more than learning about the anatomy of a plant. Like, you are learning more than that. You're learning research skills. You're learning how to monitor your own stuff. Like, there are a lot of skills within it, like hidden within it. And there's soft skills as well. That's why I love practical work, is because it's tackling the theory, but coating it in soft skills that are necessary and applicable to any situation. What else did I say? And also for exchange. Like, okay, so say for a language, you can't, exchange is expensive. It's like impractical for some people. But why can't we bring the exchange to the classroom? So for example, in an Italian language class, getting the students to do frequent Zoom calls with an Italian school from across the world, obviously. It's in Europe. So opposite of the world, they're talking to a class. Somehow they get their, time zones corrected, but that is essentially how you learn, by talking to this kid, and you're only allowed to speak in Italian, and for them, only allowed to speak English. Everyone benefits. And I say that if you haven't done your homework, like if you haven't studied your Italian, then what are you going to talk about to this kid? You're obviously just going to be super uncomfortable and realize that you screwed up because you haven't done your work. It's very obvious to someone when you haven't done your work. That, I think, practical work also motivates someone to do something, like learn something, because now they can see that it's relevant, that what they're learning actually is important for some situations, like a frequent Zoom call. And this is a bit that I actually didn't include in the ebook, but it's talking about taking responsibilities and actually having consequences to your actions. So I use the example of multiple choice versus practical. So if you're doing anatomy and if you guess the nerve wrong on multiple choice, the consequence is that you just get a wrong grade. No, not a wrong grade. A wrong mark, which leads to a lower grade. But if you get it wrong in real life, then I don't know what will happen. You're screwed. Like, you might injure your patient more than you'll help them. You might kill someone. I don't know. But you have real consequences. So obviously not as hardcore as that. Like, I don't expect students to just straight up go and do a surgery. But the example that I came up with was, say if the subject was food nutrition, and you have two options. Okay, you can either learn about food nutrition through a textbook and then do a test, standard. Or you could take Joe's class, and the test is actually going to a local canteen, cafeteria, it could be a school's canteen, and your task is to introduce a healthy food, a healthy food alternative. So that is your task, trying to meet a certain percentage recommended dietary intake of protein, for example. You have to have that meal for the students. It's something, not just what meets the protein requirements and health requirements, but what meets the taste buds of the students, what meets the person making the food's ability to make it and its efficiency to make. Now you're not actually just considering nutrition, but you're considering applicable things, because you're never going to be expected only to spit out nutrition in real life. And this is another thing I want to point out with practical work. It reminds you that work is interdisciplinary, meaning that nothing will require one straight set of knowledge confined to one subject. So actually there is one exception, which is if you want to go into, say, academia or research. So yeah, that would make sense. You're focusing on one particular topic, one particular area of study. But to be honest, not many of us are going to go into academia. So yeah, we need to apply it to diverse situations. In school, we have chemistry, and chemistry is one subject, and we have biology and another one. We never blend them up, even though they should be. So that's what it does. It reminds us that work is interdisciplinary. And another thing that practicals remind us of is that there are always exceptions to the rule. Like, always, no matter what the theory says. And I think, personally for you, I bet you've heard someone say, well, technically it's not in the books, or technically, theoretically, it should not be possible, but somehow it is. Like, for example, my dog recently had a seizure, and the vet literally said to me, she was like, okay, theoretically your dog should have, like, he ate manure and got really sick and fertilizer, whatever. And she's like, theoretically your dog should not be okay. Yet my dog Fizzle was sniffing everything, sniffing and waiting for treats. Like, he was fine. And she was like, I'm so confused, but sure. So theory is never the only answer. And another example I have of that is that in disability support work, when I was doing that work earlier in the year, my client, her general condition and everything was completely like wrong. God, I should really rephrase that. Her condition was wrong according to textbooks. So the textbooks would have said like that her condition is not possible. She should not be able to hold a spoon like she is because her condition says she can't, which her mere existence proved that wrong. So she was even saying to me, like, you cannot treat me like a textbook because I am different. I have a different case. That really reminds you, that we should be focusing on exceptions, that we cannot apply general knowledge to everything. That's what I love about practical work too. And now let's just end with the rant. The rant that was inspired by my friend who does nursing. She had a mid-semester test and they were testing aggression and forms of aggression. But before we go into that, actually, a pro tip for writing efficiently and writing fluidly, because if you're trying to write more but you just don't have it in you, or you just don't know what to write about something that makes you angry. And this is what I did for this rant, and it worked so well. It just flowed out of me, and I attribute it to diarrhea. Just it literally leaves your body really quickly. So this was a thing. She was trying to figure out operant and respondent aggression in this clip that was showing, and this clip it was just I think a 4-minute video, and she chose the wrong response. But she didn't understand why, because it looked like to her that it was a form of aggression. But then the response also didn't make sense to her. She tried to refute it, didn't work. And then I was like, okay, I'll just read it out. So I say, now let's hold up a second. How can there be a right or wrong answer to this question? Is the patient not displaying both operant and respondent aggression? Why couldn't the question be, what forms of aggression does this video demonstrate? How can you justify your answer? So it's not, first of all, I was refuting the idea of a multiple choice. A multiple choice, I just hate them. They don't achieve anything but efficiency, in my opinion. So that's what I said first. And what grinds my gears is that in real life, it doesn't matter. It's how you can manage the situation. And then I continued writing, can you imagine if this happened? The patient, I need to be somewhere. You, okay, sir, ma'am, you are displaying operant aggression. And the patient's like, what? And you're like, well, that's all I wanted to do. See ya. I was like, can you imagine if that happened? Where you're just like, I see what aggression you're facing. Like, okay, cool. So I said, why not instead assess a student's knowledge of aggression via placement? Like, look at how they deal with a patient who is displaying either operant or respondent aggression. Like, what do they do practically to deal with the problem? This tests you so much more than a multiple choice. Obviously, there is more resources that goes into it, but efficiency and that over a student's growth and learning, I think we gotta weigh our priorities. And I said, I also said, I can explain to you what type of aggression a patient is displaying, but if I cannot do anything to fix it, then what good is that? Like, I was so passionately typing away. It's crazy. Overall, I believe testing is too theoretical and not practical enough. Give students real-life situations where they have the opportunity to apply knowledge and test them there, not to test how well they can remember what type of aggression exists. And then I said, rant over, I can sleep in peace. And then afterwards, I did a little reflection and I said, I'm so proud of myself for writing this up. And then I said, well done, Joe. It's 8:06 p.m. and I deserve me some Kimmy Schmidt. I literally wrote that. I was watching Unbreakable Kimmy Schmidt at the time. Really good TV show. I'd highly recommend. And that's all for this episode. I hope that rant actually gets you thinking about how useless sometimes assessments are. They're just for efficiency, not actually to test our knowledge. yeah, positive note to end on. School is great, education is great, but we need to improve a lot of things, for sure. Awesome. See you next episode. Bye.